Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do a little bit of extra here. We're going to talk about something called Skynet. David, would you like to update us as to where we are with this?
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, no joke. The current fifth generation system, Skynet, is going to Skynet 6A. Now, this is a master interoperable, multi-domain, low orbit constellation satellite system that covers all defense and security platforms and systems. So I kid you not, it is actually called Skynet. All right. Now, this was something that Permanent Secretary Stephen Lovegrove went in with a company called OneWeb, which was owned by an Indian oligarch, Mittal. You might know their name from the steel debacles that we've been through in this country. And I think the sums of something like 500 million were put into OneWeb for rescuing them. They were already bankrupt, to then go in with this low Earth orbit satellite system, Skynet. So it's not dissimilar to what Musk is doing with his Starlink. It's the same kind of idea. And what's happened is that OneWeb have essentially been taken over by EU Telsat. All right. So clue in the title, EU Telsat. All right. So okay, and so that's just pure EU in terms of this master fifth and sixth generation computer and satellite weapons command and control system. Now the problem is that China have a stake in EU Telsat. Now I know senior officers have raised concerns over how this is contained in terms of national security, but we go back to the problem that we've had. You know, when they talk about national security, is that the UK or is that the EU? Right, because it's not, people don't use the same common frames of reference with this. Some people, when they talk about this stuff, it means EU. You jump to a conclusion that it meant the UK, you'd be wrong. Now, the problem is, of course, is that that will be the master operating system for the EU's defence union. Okay, and we're in that. So how does anybody, and you think of all the command and control and weapon systems on a ship or aircraft or Royal Air Force or the Army, they're all interlinked with this thing. There'll be no, how does anybody, well, if, as well we know, it's always the IT that goes wrong. So what happens if that goes wrong? Where's the plan B? Where's the default? If somebody somewhere finds a way of hacking it or turning it off, or it fails, whatever the permutations are, what happens then? Do the service personnel in whatever they're doing in any of the, by land or by sea or air, oh no, hang on a minute. Oh, the computer says no, and we're all sat here hanging out with incoming. So I think that's a major problem, and it's a major flag, because obviously you can see that the master bit that nobody's talking about, which is actually the critical bits of equipment, which will be the AI and the supercomputers and the satellites, EU Telsat.
I had a wonderful uncle, and he said before he died, one day people will go back to using pen and paper.
Well, maybe.
Well, when you think a store can't operate now, you can't take, first of all, they don't want to take cash. So if you don't take cash and your computer system goes down with your credit cards, etc., that means no store can operate. I mean, you cannot believe the stupidity. And this is just at a local level from around here, from your village shop. Now, your village shop is all the same, etc., right through. So you just look at military and defense. It's just mind-boggling, David.
It is, and if you've not got proper autonomy over this stuff, things can start to go wrong. And I think anybody that's whether you were in Civvy Street or in the military, and you've had problems with the IT, it's always but think of it in an under fire situation. I think we come back to the sort of intelligence failings. Now I know Deal have called all this stuff out about Huawei coming into GCHQ, and of course how that's that infrastructure, that was a serious problem. How does anybody manage this? Well, this obviously is far, far worse. But we've got to look at this in terms of, well, we did have a functioning space program, and that all got stopped, and we did used to make aircraft in this country, and TSR2, we could come back to that one. But in short, whether you were making whatever it is, and I think that the Red Arrows is a good one, isn't it? They're flying around in an antique Hawk. It may be, other than the Nimrods that David Cameron put the JCB through, it's probably the last thing BAE made. Even if you went to them now and said, could we need a plane? Could they even make one?
David,
that's
exactly.
But I went through this. Yeah, I went through this battle order. The way that you would technically undo a country nowadays, because you can do it from standoff positions. You can do it from a standoff position, both with disinformation and misinformation, and you can rein in huge amounts of traffic and try and warp the reality. And of course, that's always the objective with this sort of stuff, is that you want to warp people's reality so they can't frame reality correctly. Well, once you've done that, as Hermann Goering reminded us, we can do anything once we've done that. So that's a big part of the process. Then we start interfering with stuff. It'll be energy, it'll be food, and we've got critical problems with our food resilience, our energy resilience, as we know, and all of the rest of it. So once we have this sort of, this all things happening together, if you put it with measles map up, that problem there and that problem there, and all of a sudden the spots start getting more and more and more. At the point when you've got civil decomposition at the threshold you want it, in come the missiles. The missiles are not first. The missiles come at the end, not at the beginning. Now, that period where all this is going on, and we're in that period now, we're in the battle order period, right? We're partway through that, So at some, this is the bit that concerns me: is where's the expertise and experience? Where's the civil defence? Where's the resilience? Where we're factoring this in now, where we have to accept, we are at war, and we're going to have to put the country on a war footing. That was one of the, actually linked back to the previous interview, is that what is the situation with this European Defence and Security Union when Ursula von der Leyen moves the EU onto a war footing? I believe that will happen. What does that mean then? Because who then at that point, anywhere democratically in Europe or peoples-wise, how do you interface with the EU? As well, Liz, after having, I don't know, 25, 30 years in this EU,
30 plus.
In EU now, how do you deal with them? They're a dictatorship.
Quite. And they're not elected by anybody.
Nobody elected them.
Not even in other countries are they elected by anybody. The EU
who says no at that point? How do you say no when they've come up, when they're militarized? How do you do it? This was always the senior officers' a big objection. Major General Julian Thompson being the most vocal, who led the brigade in the Falklands, Royal Marine. How do you say no? Who will say no?
Right, David, we've thank you for bringing us update on Skynet, which is something that it was absolutely incredible. Last summer, I sat out with some people on one of the nice nights we had, and we watched the satellites going across the sky, and you think, dear God, we have got no idea what's going on, really. Any of us, have we?
A lot of them up there, and well, it'll be, we're almost back to some, the evil oligarch Bond villain, who will, if somebody has control of this stuff, whether it be, one side of the earth or the other, it's very, very worrying just how much power. And it's okay if it's a benevolent power, but if it's not, and that's the issue, is we are in serious trouble.
And the problem is, David, we've looked at it recently. PSYOPs used to be taught to the military for use against our adversaries. PSYOPs is now being used against our own people.
Yes, well, this is, we're into, perhaps we need to do another episode on 5th and 6th generation warfare. So we'll conclude on that, shall we?
Well, we most certainly will. David, thank you very much.
Pleasure.